Please join me in giving Dr. Clinton a warm Plasp welcome.
Great, thank you. Let's see if my laptop will talk to me today. So I am so thrilled to be here. How many of you are parents with children in Plasp programs? How many of you are? Wow. And how many of you are teachers, early childhood educators, or supports to teachers in the, wow, fantastic. So, focus, Jean, get your slides up. But I am absolutely blown away by what I'm learning here tonight and with my conversations about this organization. I can't quite find the right words for all I've been working in the world of the early years for 30 years, I would probably say. I was when I was pregnant with my fourth child, I was on a daycare task force in Hamilton. And I remember my friend asking me, what was harder, having Jojo by a cesarean section or being on that committee? Because 30 years ago, if you had described to me what Lynn just described, Plasp is all about. If you had said that to me 30 years ago, I would have said, well, you know what? I'm a psychiatrist and I know some good drugs that you can use to get the right picture. You're obviously delusional. So, it's such an honor to me and so humbling to hear the words of my mentor, Fraser Mustard, come from Lynn and from many of you, that the vision that we fought for and strove for so long is actually coming to be an incredible reality. You look at these gorgeous pictures, the faces of these children, the singing of those songs, there is an emission of joy. Can you imagine if we could capture that energy of joy that I see that is so much an integral part of the work and the efforts of Plasp? So, a huge congratulations and thank you to all of you involved here. So, enough about my emotional reaction to being here and seeing the fabulous work. I want to talk to you about what you already know. And what you already know, because it is now the infrastructure of what Plasp is all about, and that is that love builds brains. Many of you, I'm sure, have suffered through some of the videos that we heard about, that I talk about how the brain gets built. Now, are my words being transcribed? So I better not say frickin'. If it's written down there, oh no, you'll actually see it. All right, but wait a second. I have to tell you, I'll tell you right at the start. So I do say that word once in a while, but where it comes from is not swearing, just so you know, and in case any of you have sensitive sensibilities. I learned it from a colleague out in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, a kindergarten teacher, and she said, Jean, I had this shock one day. A little boy came up to me and said, Miss, I want to read a book for you, and it's about a frickin' elephant. And she goes, oh, did I not check all of my books, every single one? And so over he comes and sits down beside her and opens the book, and it's all about an African elephant. So it's not cursing. It's not cursing. But I am going to tell you I am going to tell you that this organization is based on that belief that love builds brains. I see in these pictures a dream come true of children who have been enveloped in the world of adults whose eyes light up when they enter the room. That dream that many of us have is living truly in the programs that I'm hearing and seeing here. But do you know the other part of it is, so think about that as parents and as teachers. Do your eyes light up when the children enter the room? But what I've also seen as I've been watching these gorgeous pictures go by is those kids' eyes lighting up when their teachers and their parents enter the room. And so when you think about learning and growing and thriving, this is at the heart of the matter. So let me tell you just a little bit about myself as a child psychiatrist. Because I am a medical doctor, I have to tell you if I've got any big drug company sponsoring me, you know, telling me to use this drug here, I'm going to tell you, but absolutely not. These are my 5 great sponsors that you heard a little bit about. These are my 5 great kids. Now, I don't have, just in case any of you have a warped sense of humor, I don't have a couple of other ones that aren't so great that I don't show pictures of. So these are my 5 guys, and I show them to you so that you know that yes, I've been pretty busy. I've been doing lots of stuff, but what my true heart is involved in is in the raising of my children, my 5 kids, and my now, look at that, oh, thank you, more, aw, my 4 gorgeous grandchildren aged from 3, 22 months, and 4 weeks old. So I wish for every child what I see in my littlest ones. I wish for every child that they have parents who are crazy madly in love with them. That my little ones who are now in childcare, the 3-year-old Liam and the twins Jamie and Tommy, who are in childcare where their eyes are lighting up when they are going there and seeing their teachers. They love it there. They love what they are learning, what they are experiencing. And there is the kind of partnership that I hear described at PLASP. And that is, there is a partnership where parents care about how well the staff are at the childcare. It's not seen as babysitting. Forbid that word when it comes to early learning and care, but really partnerships being developed. So, you know, when I think about the years that we have been fighting for a high quality system of early learning and care in Ontario and Canada, I really have to think about what I've learned. What from the First Nations peoples. And, you know, one of the stories that I very often tell is the one of when I heard a Mohawk elder called Tom Porter speak. And Tom said, what I hear alive and well in this PLASP community, and that is children are the sacred ones. They are the heart of the community, and it is the community's responsibility to raise those children. It also, Tom Porter said that in his language, in the Mohawk language, the word for child is he who has the light within. He who has the light within. So it means that in early learning and care, and I'll say in education, that the work really is about how do you let that light shine. We have had an education system that has not really had that focus as much on leading the children's knowledge out of them. We've had more of an education system that has been in the past about filling the bucket, or as we heard, I call it stuffing the duck, right? Or stuffing the frickin' duck more often. Where we think that we as adults know what children need to know. That we have this adult-oriented view that says, let us fill up the children, these empty vessels. Well, what we're learning through the science of learning and the science of development coming together is that, in fact, the wisdom of the elders, lighting that fire, shining that light, is exactly what we need to be doing. So I became a brain geek through introduction by Dr. Fraser Mustard, who you heard mentioned. And I am an unapologetic brain geek. I love the brain. But what I love about the brain in this area is that what we knew to be true from our grandmothers, from our multicultural perspectives about what children need to grow, suddenly big science guys like Fraser Mustard were saying, well, you know what? Experience builds the brain. So what does that mean? That means what we now know is that the brain is not the fixed organ, the machine that we thought it was, thought of it like when I graduated from medical school in 1981. The brain, your intelligence, is not fixed, as an example. What we now know is that the baby is born with trillions of brain cells called neurons that are all in the right place, but they haven't been connected up yet. They are for breathing and heart rate and that kind of thing, but the majority of the actual brain connectivity, so much of it is happening after the baby is born. That's why scientists think a newborn baby's brain is only about a third of the size that it's going to be by the time it's a toddler, which makes a whole lot of sense when you think that a toddler's brain, if babies were born and their brains were fully mature, you'd have to deliver a toddler's head rather than an infant's head, right? I don't want you to go too far into detail there. So what we have learned and why high-quality programs are so important is that our brain is built not just by our genes, but our genes listening to the environment and the genes being activated, turned on, or silenced. So we are building our brains. The most rigorous and enthusiastic time for that brain growth happens in the last trimester of pregnancy, the last bit of pregnancy, and the first couple of years. But the good news is it doesn't end there. There's another whole period of time in adolescence where there's all kinds of changes happening. It's not just hormones. It's not just puberty. The brain of adolescents is under construction. So next time you have an argument with one of your teens, just remember Jean saying, under construction. So, if the brain is sculpted by a lifetime of experiences, so what does that mean? It means that if a baby and a toddler and a preschooler, as examples, hear lots and lots and lots of language, then their neurons are going to talk to each other. They're going to connect up with each other and build super highways of connection, super networks of connection. If they're spoken in two languages, they get a double highway. It's awesome. It's fantastic. But what happens, and I've just spent my entire day today working with children's aid societies in Hamilton, and I can see what happens when children do not get the nurturing, loving care that has been described so well here. We know from studies that some children who live in intense poverty, that their brain cells in the language area have been developed very differently than kids who are well off. That they have, there's one big study that talks about a 30 million word gap. That the children who didn't hear very much language didn't develop very much language. So can you imagine that then, that the neurons talk to each other over synapses and branches build around them. And so if you've got lots of language and lots of singing and lots of reading, you get a massive oak tree. But if you don't have that, then you get more like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree. You know, not too much going. But here is the amazing news. The amazing news is you can have families who are really struggling with poverty. Bring those children and those families to a PLASP program, and you change that child and that family's direction in life. We have the science, as we've heard. Why is that? It's because that brain is being built. The potential in every child is massive. That brain is being built by the experiences. So, you know, I always joke about the fact my first degree is music and philosophy. And we used to go to the pub and we would drink periodically. And we'd argue, is it nature or is it nurture? Is it genes or the environment? And so what we know now is it was a great time, but it was a waste of time. Because what we understand now is that the genes are absolutely being built by the environment. They're being turned on by that environment. It's not either or, it's them working together. Now here's another First Nations tale. Teaching of the Elder, I learned from Nancy Jones in Timmins. She told us the tale, the teaching about the cradle board that you see there. The cradle board, or the Tikanagan, in the Ojibwe teachings, the baby should be with the parents in the community all the time. They stay in that cradle board, so they are part of the community, seeing everything that's going on, being protected from anything noxious or not nice happening around them. Well, I heard this teaching and I thought, oh, wow, that's something. And then my friend Stuart Shanker, another scientist, talked about the first year of life should be like an external womb. That little brain that I described is actually a year premature. So we need to be creating the environments in our infant world where they are so nurtured and protected that they are going to blossom and grow. When I think about high quality, parents are working, so a high quality infant care needs to absolutely be thinking about, are we in our environments creating that external womb? I'm so interested in this, I'm going to be developing a series of videos for childcare to think about how do you do on the day-to-day drip, drip, drip of everyday experience, what babies need to thrive and grow. I know I'm going to be coming, I'm sure, and learning tons from the PLASP programs. But you know, it's what we need to be thinking about as parents. It's not about this. It's not about how many times can I let the little one play with this and figure out different things and aren't they smart? We know that we learn by doing. We know also that the doing is in face to face. It's not in FaceTime. It's in face to FaceTime. But you know, we have to do, and it's why I so love the collaboration that I hear that parents as part of the whole, that seeing parents as competent, capable, full of potential as well, that I hear in this organization. Because what we know in other organizations and other places is that parents don't understand how much they need to be part of their babies, toddlers, preschoolers' lives by co-regulating them. Lots of parents, and you see in this study that 42% of parents believed that children had the ability to control their emotions by the time they were 2 years of age. Are you frickin' kidding? That is the most violent stage of mankind. So what little ones need when they're tiny, what they need is someone who is going to serve and return, who's going to co-regulate their big feelings. That's what we see in the parenting. That's what I see in the beautiful parenting of my children. And that's what you'll see in the programs here. Why is this so important? Okay, you've got it. The brain is being developed. The architecture of the brain is being sculpted by the experiences that kids have. And babies don't say, oh, I don't like this one. This one isn't good for me. They just take it all in. So we now know so much more than we did when I was having my babies 25 years ago. My youngest is 24. So when we didn't know as much, even though this little guy here knows, he's 2 weeks of age. It comes from the 70s, right? We don't see froze like that as much anymore. But you know, here is Andy Meltzoff, 2-week-old baby, sticking his tongue out, opening his mouth, puckering his mouth, and this little 2-week-old is imitating it. So I have to confess, I am the worst nana in the world. I read this and then say to my son, Andrew, would you talk to Liam? So in this little video, which unfortunately I don't think is going to work. Oh, here we go.
Show me your tongue.
He's saying, "Show me your tongue." Isn't that amazing? I know he's destined for brilliance, no doubt. But you know, how can we partner more with parents who aren't as involved in high quality early learning and care, that they are their child's best toy? Here you have my beauteous son-in-law with the twins when they're tiny. We are our children's best toys. They learn best by being with us. So, how does the brain work? Well, here's how Nana sees it. I literally do. It's really kind of pathetic. So when on the bottom there, you see brain cells at different ages of life. So you see the little blobby bits in the middle are the neurons, and then they've got axons. What you notice is as the little one ages, that you don't get new blobby bits, you get new connections, right? So this is my beauty little Liam. So when he's about 6 months of age and he's kicking his feet and he's smiling away like that, guess what I'm thinking? Look at those neurons firing. Look at those new synapses, and then with development, he gets to pull himself up. He pulls himself up, and I think, oh my gosh, look at the different areas of his brain that are wiring up. And then he gets to stand. Well, you know, this is wonderful. It's wonderful. It's the experiences that we long for all of our children to have. But you know, I'm reading a book written by a colleague, Bruce Perry. It was written a while ago, called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And his parents raised him in a crate. And so he quite literally couldn't walk and he couldn't talk. He could growl, and he knew how to roll over in submission. His brain was being developed by that experience there. So, people hear me talk and think, oh, and when I started reading all this stuff, I would go, oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know this. Maybe I screwed my kids up by not knowing it. What we know is that the majority of our kids are going to do okay. They're going to do okay. But we have our children as our sacred ones today. And are we doing all that we can to have them thrive? Part of what that is are they learning how to read the minds of others? Watch this little video here. Little guy about 18 months of age.
Oh.
Don't you just love that little look up? Don't you look, so he's problem solving. He's reading the mind of the other. He has empathy. He's 18 months of age. How has he learned empathy? So, the scientists and the philosophers can have all of this big arguments. Is altruism, are we hardwired for it or not? We do know that this little guy has never met that stranger before. He's never run into an adult who was such a dolt that couldn't open the thing. But we see that he is secure and safe enough. He's secure and safe enough to leave the sight of his mum. So from the science that was referenced earlier, the fact that he is secure and able to go out, we think that he probably has what we call a secure attachment. And that means that the adults in his life were ready when he was upset, sick, or distressed to be right there for him. And he has a mental model of relationships that says the world is a safe place. I'm so secure that I am going to be looked after when I'm needing, that I can go out and explore the world. But I'm also secure in knowing that if something happens, man, oh man, I can wheel back right in to that secure object, that secure person. What we are now learning is that the high quality of childcare experiences wires up babies' social brain. This drive to connect and help others, we see so intensely in high-quality programs where children are allowed to play, to learn, to inquire about the things that they're curious about, and to have relationship and connection. Relationship and connection. So when we look at the new brain science, we have to shift dramatically from the old one that said, you get a set number of neurons, your IQ and certain things are fixed, to a new brain, a way of looking at the brain called brain plasticity. That's what I'm watching as I'm watching my 4 little gorgeous ones grow. Their brains are malleable. They're changeable by the environment. So let's really make sure that we are creating the community capacity to support our families to be able to do the absolute best for their children. But I've been a child psychiatrist for 30 years. And I just, as I was thinking about presenting tonight, I was thinking, okay, I love talking about love builds brains. But I also want to share with you as parents and educators something that we're seeing more about. And that is that loving your child is not enough. It's terrific to love your child and have your eyes light up, but children also need clear expectations. They need routines. They need us to be firm, fair, and kind. What do I see when I visit high-quality childcare programs that I'll be visiting here in your PLAS programs? I'll be seeing environments that are loving, but that also have high expectations, have routines, that respect the child, but that there are routines. What I see so much in my clinical practice is parents are becoming more and more afraid of their child being distressed. They fall into what Nancy Samelin calls the happiness trap. Well, you know, the reality is, for us to thrive as humans, we need to experience some dismay and distress, have those around us help cope with it, so that we can then learn, I can do this. I can manage this. But one of the, again, I'm going to pull out my handy, what am I supposed to call it? Smartphone, right? I'm not supposed to call it an iPhone. Smartphone, my smartphone. What we're finding in the work that I do and in primary care where I consult is that parents, that you're not supposed to have any screen time under 2, according to the Canadian Pediatrics and the American Academy of Pediatrics. But parents are saying, oh, my little one is distressed. You know, I'm changing their diaper and they're squirming, and so I give them the iPhone. And I want to say, you want to talk about squirming? What my guys were like, it was like a rodeo changing it. It's normal, it's typical. We don't need to give the baby a smartphone to soothe them. They need to then have the experiences of us talking to them, of singing to them, of playing with them as they're changing their diaper. We need to have the cupboard where the pots and pans where they can go in and build things. I was the education lead for an enhanced 18-month well baby visit in Ontario. And one of the questions that we asked on a checklist was, can your baby stack 3 blocks? What we found out is babies don't stack frickin' blocks anymore. So I said, well, let's see, can they stack 3 DVDs? So here's a provocation for you. Here's a provocation for you. The world is changing in terms of how the science of learning and the science of development have come together. So I'm reading this very interesting book called The Carpenter or the Gardener. And I want to provoke you gently as parents and as volunteers and as educators to ask yourself this question. As I describe the different roles, I want you to think about what's your view of the child. So a carpenter has a fixed model of what's going to be the end product in mind. They measure, they do all of that, all of the work to create that, say, chair. Do we see ourselves in our role as parents as like a carpenter? We want our kids to turn out right. We do parenting so that they turn out to be compliant, well-behaved. Or Alison Gopnik, in her book by this title, asks, are you more of a gardener? And I'm asking early childhood educators the same now too. Do you see your role as being cultivating the soil, of priming, making sure the environment is meeting the needs of every individual child? Is really thinking about, what does this child need? What does my child need to thrive? So I used to ask people, are you a carpenter or are you a gardener? And then as I'm learning from people, we may have, as parents, an aspiration, you know, a hope, a dream, that we will be more gardener-like. But when push comes to shove, we may be a touch of that carpenter. I know there are many times that I have longed for a 2x4, particularly for number 4. But you know, I ask you this because as you're searching to figure out, you know, if you've got a dilemma in parenting, I'm going to suggest to you that the evidence we have is that when you can be more of an emotional coach with your kids, more of an emotional coach, a gardener, asking, what can you do in this situation that might be helpful? I was just with friends in Edmonton, and I was talking to them and did some presentations, and they were telling me, my friend was saying, Jean, you have opened my eyes. That I think that much of the behavior that we see with children is when their goals and values are rubbing up against ours, when we want them to do something and they want to do something else. And so oftentimes we see misbehavior. But I think what we're seeing is really stress behavior. So Joyce gave me, when I was talking about that their system is activated. And what we see is that when people are too brick wall firm, do it because I said so kind of parents, the kids have more tension, the kids have more aggravation. So my friend tells me this, her young 14-year-old grandson has always had issues with anxiety, she says. And so they go out, they've got a little 5, his cousin. They go out for dinner quite often. They look after the kids on Thursdays. And so they go to this restaurant, and the little 5-year-old is playing with one of the flowers. It's, touching the buds and all of this kind of stuff. Touching the buds and fooling with it. And so the 14-year-old says, don't do that. Don't do that. And my friend, who has a particular slant on the world, thinks this is him. He's being controlling. He's being bossy. She wants to, she has reprimanded him. But then she said, but Jean, after I hear you talk, I'm thinking like a gardener now, but in those situations, I want him to behave in a certain way. But I haven't been asking the question, what's underneath his behavior? Where does it come from? And so we talked about it, and she put together suddenly this aha, that he was an anxious little guy, and when he saw his little 5-year-old niece maybe breaking the rules, it made him anxious, not controlling, and it was stress behavior, not misbehavior. And so when we start thinking about this, we start thinking, how can we build more connection with our kids? How can we build relationship first with our children? And think about correcting later. So I wrote a paper for the Ministry for the Early Years Branch and talked about the importance of adult and child relationships. It's absolutely huge. The relationships build the brain. Relationships are the nutrients of the brain. And one of the things I asked people to think about was, how do you spend your time with children? Are you connecting before correcting and directing them? But one of the realities is we have got a massive interferer. I'm not here to bash anybody about how much time. I'm terrible spending time on this. But I think that we need to really reflect and think about, are the devices in our life interfering with relationship? Oh my goodness. Not only are they interfering with relationship, now the poor kid can't even go to the bathroom. Heaven forbid. So the question to ask not is throw out all of your devices, but are devices advancing the relationship that I have with my children, or are they distracting and taking away from it? And then as parents and as educators, are we directing and correcting our kids, or are we connecting with them? And are we doing that through what we know kids learn best, and that is through play? Are we, and we're seeing a nature deficit disorder and plays going down. In fact, Sir Ken Robinson, who is a fabulous speaker, talks about the fact that they've done a survey of thousands of kids across the world and have discovered that on average, kids are playing less than 2 hours a day outside. And he says, you know, in federal penitentiaries, there's a rule that says that inmates in federal penitentiaries need 2 hours outside. So our kids are playing less than federal inmates. And he says this is not good. So, what we think, as we heard earlier, affects what we feel, affects how we act. What we think affects what we feel and how we act. So you start to see the threads here. If you think your job as a parent or as an educator is to mold that empty vessel, you're going to treat them in one way. If you think that your role as an educator, as a parent, is to create the environment for thriving, you'll do it in a different way. Let me give you a story. And this is a true story from a patient I had a number of years ago. This young girl in high school came into school and she was late. And she came into the classroom and the teacher said, "You get down to the office now." What he thought, I think, is that, oh, these kids these days are not respectful. How he felt was angry and how he acted was rejecting. The next day, she came into class late. It was a different teacher because they were on rotation. And the teacher said to her, "Oh, just go and sit in go sit in your seat. I'll talk to you afterwards." So she went and sat in her seat and promptly fell asleep. So he went up to her afterwards and started talking to her. So what he felt, what he thought was, there's something going on. How he felt was curious, and how he acted was reaching out to her. Same behavior. And so he said, "So what's going on?" And she said, "Well, sir, my mom is really sick in hospital, and my dad is spending all the time he can with her. But our business, our family business, is running a restaurant. And so I need to leave school, I need to go to the restaurant, and I'm the one that ends up closing it at the end of the night. So I'm not in bed until 2 o'clock in the morning. That's why I'm late and why I fell asleep." What they thought, those two teachers, vastly different, same behavior. How they felt and how they acted were very different. Both of those experiences altered that girl's brain. How she saw herself, she actually was telling me that she decided to become a teacher based on how she was treated by that second teacher. But you know, can you imagine a child who gets exposed to that kind of stress and pressure, stress, pressure all of the time? How we now know that affects the brain. So the last concept I want to share with you is this concept about the impact of stress on the developing brain. So we know from the work of great researchers, great scientists, that our stress system, and that means, when you get stressed or you get a fright, your heart rate goes fast, you start sweating, and your pupils dilate, you might even get a tummy ache. So that is the physiological or the body's response to stress. So Sonia Lupien has examined thousands and thousands of people, and she knows that it is nuts. That stress system gets turned on in a novel situation, if it's unpredictable, if it's a threat to the ego, or there's a sense of loss of control. So, novelty and unpredictability, major issue for my partner, my husband Jim. I love it. I can go with the flow. Threat to the ego, okay, so great. You say, "Oh, well, thanks, Jean. I liked your talk, but the guy we had last year was so good," right? I'm a little sensitive to that. Sense of loss of control. I didn't know the research before I had 5 children, right? So my life is chaos a lot of the time. The thing about stress, though, the stress system, is it gets turned on, the same system, whether you can't find your keys or you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. The same system was developed long ago for threat perception. So you see where I'm going here? Threat perception wires the brain. So there's anxiety, there's stress, which is absolutely positive. Stress and anxiety get a bad rap. It's good for us to feel anxious. As we're starting, before I'm doing a presentation, I always get a bit sweaty. I'm always a little bit thinking about, am I going to deliver something that's meaningful to people? There's tolerable stress. So when someone is very sick or someone dies, having the buffering of relationships help you deal with that big stress system being turned on. The stress I worry about most, the stress that I was talking about all day at Children's Aid today, is toxic stress. That's where kids' brains are being boiled in environments where they feel the world's not safe. The world's not safe. One of the children that we spoke about today, I didn't see them. I speak about them to help Children's Aid. And one of the kids was taken to hospital at 9 because he was thinking of killing himself, and his parents refused to take him home. Abandoned in his most trying, troubling time. So you know what's happening in his brain is a biologically wired system that was put there to protect us from danger. So if we see a snake, we need a part of our brain that says, watch out, jump. If we just had the part of our brain that said, oh, what is that interesting slithering thing there? We would never have survived as a species, right? That makes sense. But if we only had the part that jumped when we saw something frightening, we'd be jumping every time we saw a cord. So what we are now learning, why high quality early learning and care and parenting is so important, is that we're learning that if you have the bombardment of your brain with the stress hormones that get turned on, if you get bombarded, it's like you're walking home and you see a bear. Your brain is being turned on to high alert, fight or flight all of the time. So you know, when you see a bear, you want a brain that says, get out of here. You don't want a brain that says, oh, look at how big and different the sizes of your teeth are, right? Here's what happens. We've got the brain, we've got the amygdala deep in our brain, the neurons that are the fight or flight center, sending signals down, release adrenaline, release cortisol, get me running, get me healing. We've got another part of our brain called the hippocampus, new learning and memory. As I was hearing from Stan, that he remembered that story from 9 years ago, or I was hearing about remembering some of the videos, that means that the neurons in their brains were changed. So that was their hippocampus, new learning and memory. So they get turned on. But what happens when the bear is always there? Well, look at this list. Look at this list of irritability, poor memory, difficulty focusing. What we know is that we need to be buffering our kids from the impact of toxic stress, from stress that is overwhelming, that is not buffered by relationship. So let me finish by showing you some of the ways that I teach this. And I want you to remember that I'm a child psychiatrist, so I get to use puppets. So I think of that amygdala, the fight or flight center, and think about this as parents and teachers, like my porcupine friend here. So when the porcupine senses danger, its prickles go up and it releases adrenaline and cortisol so you can run, get more energy, and heal. Now, he's got a good buddy called the Hippocampus. Here you go. Little did you know that puppets would be part of this evening tonight. So Hippocampus is new learning and memory. If you remember something from tonight later on, then we've changed your neurons. Your hippocampi are bigger now than when you walked in the room. Can't you just feel it, man? Feel it? Anyway, okay, enough, Jean. These two work really well together until that amygdala is on guard all of the time. This here causes cell death to the hippocampus, and this is the non-teachable moment. When I hear about children who are yelled at and screamed at, and parents are trying to teach them lessons, or you know, not everybody has the high quality early learning and care that you have, I think of those little porcupine brains being on high alert, and they're not learning. What we know is that children, and I can tell you this from 30 years as a child psychiatrist, that children will do well if they can. They will do well if they can. And that much of the misbehavior that I've seen over the years is caused by stress behavior, not misbehavior. And we need to become, as adults in children's lives, particularly children who have really problem-saturated lives, we need to become stress detectives and reframe that. If I could help parents see that their children's misbehaviors, whether you call it ADHD, ODD, many of them, are in fact stress because of the environment. Kids act out, but what they need is our nurturing understanding and support. So let me finish with a story. I started just a little bit late. I want to wrap up now. Well, let me finish with a story from my dear friend, Mary Gordon, who has a program called Roots of Empathy. And in Roots of Empathy, babies and their parents visit a classroom for the entire school year. And so the baby starts as just a couple of months old, and the children in the class, with a Roots of Empathy facilitator, start to predict, well, what do you think the baby will do next? So they learn about neurons, they learn about synapses, they learn about temperament, they learn about stress, all these things that I've been talking about tonight. Well, here's the power of this program and the power of connection. There was a young boy in this particular class that Mary tells the story. He was 14, the other kids were 12. He had a life where, Mary describes it, life was not fair to him or kind. He had seen his mom murdered when he was 4 years of age. He had multiple diagnoses and had been in a ton of different foster homes. But you know, this day, the mum was talking about temperament, and she said, we wanted a snuggly little baby, but you get the baby that the Creator sends to you, and so he loves to interact with the world and kick his feet and do all kinds of things. Anybody want to try the snuggly, she asked, and didn't this boy say, I would like to? So he came up. And the baby, he was handed the baby, and that baby snuggled right in. And for the rest of the class, he just sat in the rocking chair and snuggled in. At the end of the class, he came back to the mum with the baby, handed to her, and turned to the Roots of Empathy facilitator. And he said to her, do you think someone who's never been loved can learn to be a dad? It's such a beautiful story to me of how that program, that baby, changed that boy's brain. It gave him what our First Nations people consider the mental health and well-being. It gave him a sense of hope, a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning, and a sense of purpose. It was through the collaboration, the power of one being brought all together in community. As I visit here with your PLASP community, I know that there are many Daryls out there, boys like that. And I also know that when the community comes together in the way that PLASP is pulling you together, you are making the lives of children changed for the better, for the flourishing, and for the thriving. So I thank you for the invitation to come, and I honor you and so respect the work that you do, and keep on doing it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Dr. Clinton, thank you so much for today.
You're welcome.
You have made a profound impact on us tonight. You have changed our neurons for sure. And for that, I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for coming this evening, and enjoy the rest of the night.